Hello there and welcome to the Week in Parliament. Coming up, after Brexit notes are caught on camera, MPs demand a bigger taste of the government's plans for leaving the EU.
Can I suggest to the Prime Minister that having your cake and eating it isn't a serious strategy for Brexit?
We are ambitious in getting the best possible deal for trading with and operating within the single European market.
The Liberal Democrats celebrate their by-election victory in Richmond Park.
Can I be the first Member of Parliament to congratulate Sarah Olney on her fantastic election yesterday, overturning a majority of 23,000.
And away from the drama of Westminster, we discover who won what in the Political Studies Association Awards. But first, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has accused the government of cutting business taxes while failing to adequately fund the NHS and social care in England. At Question Time, he seized on the absence of any new money in the autumn statement to help ease the pressures and accused the Chancellor of presiding over falling growth, wages and investment. But Theresa May rejected the claim that the government's economic strategy was failing.
The IMF says that this will be the fastest growing advanced economy in the world this year. Unemployment is down, we have record numbers of people in employment, and we have companies like Nissan, Jaguar Land Rover, Honda, Arm, Google, Facebook, Apple investing in the UK, securing jobs here in the United Kingdom. That's what a good economic plan does.
Since she quotes the Institute of Fiscal Studies, I think she's been a little bit selective, because they also went on to say that the prospect for workers over the next 6 years was, and I quote, dreadful, and went on to say, creating, and I quote, the worst decade for living standards since the last war and probably since the 1920s.
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, I think given that he can't differentiate between the IMF and the IFS, it's probably a good job he's sitting there and I'm standing here.
In the autumn statement last week, the Chancellor spoke for over 50 minutes. During that time, he didn't once mention the National Health Service or social care. 1.2 million people are lacking the care they need. Why was there not one single penny more for social care in the autumn statement?
Prime Minister!
There is absolutely no doubt that the social care system is under pressure. We recognise that. If you just look at the fact that there are 1 million more people aged over 65 today than there were in 2010, we see the sort of pressures on the social care system. There's some very good practice up and down the country, and sadly there's some not so good practice. What we need to do is make sure everybody is giving the best possible service to people who need it.
A backbench MP raised notes scribbled by a Conservative aide about Brexit that were snapped by a Downing Street photographer.
Can I suggest to the Prime Minister that having your cake and eating it isn't a serious strategy for Brexit, and that Britain deserves better than having to rely on leaked documents to know the government's plans? How on earth can she expect MPs to vote to trigger Article 50 when she refuses to give any clarity as to what kind of Brexit she's pursuing? Will it involve us still being members of the single market? Is it arrogance or is it incompetence?
Prime Minister!
I've answered this question many times in this House, and I can assure the honourable lady, she asks specifically about the issue of the single market and trading with the European Union. I've been very clear. We are ambitious in getting the best possible deal for trading with and operating within the single European market.
Theresa May. And that question of how far the government would go to hang on to access to the single market came up the next day when the Brexit Secretary David Davis was in the Commons. Being questioned by a Labour MP, he suggested Britain could continue making payments to Brussels after it's left the European Union to secure access to the single market.
Will the government consider making any contribution in any shape or form for access to the single market? The simple answer we've given to this before is, and it's very important because there is a distinction between picking off an individual policy and setting out a major criterion. And the major criterion here is, I'm going to answer him if he lets me. The major criterion here is that we get the best possible access for goods and services to the European market. And if that is included in what he's talking about, then of course we would consider it.
An SNP MP turned to alleged remarks by the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, since denied that he supported the free movement of people.
Congratulate the government on the sophistication of its approach to Brexit. I mean, deploying the Foreign Secretary to declare his undying support for free movement of labour is a masterly addition to the policy of chaos and confusion at the heart of the government's strategy. But if 121 days is a long time in politics, how many days before the 31st of March will the government narrow down its range of policies to one and tell us what it is?
We will use all 121 days to get the best possible policy for us, and then we'll put that single policy to the European Union.
And the Lords too wanted to have their say on Brexit.
In my view, the so-called opportunities of Brexit are largely delusional vistas. Similarly, we must stop talking nonsense about becoming an offshore Singapore or a haven of social dumping, as many on the continent believe the government plans. Full participation in the single market on fair rules should be the aim.
The debate featured a maiden speech from a former senior diplomat.
The mood I find in Europe is not one of wanting to punish the UK, but of great sadness that a country that has done so much for peace and prosperity on the continent should be turning its back on this project at a time of such turbulence and danger in the world.
We should remember this is not just a trade issue. There are a huge number of issues in relation to EU law, to justice, agriculture, fisheries, defence, home affairs, the environment, amongst many. And 2 years' negotiation will not be enough.
A former Home Office minister dismissed those who argued Britain wasn't in a strong place to negotiate a good exit deal.
They've largely given up on the ploy of a second referendum, except for some noble lords, and will now try and make the case that the single market is absolutely essential to our future, and they claim that people did not vote to leave the single market, just the EU. Not so, my lords. People voted to take back control of our money, our borders and our laws, and staying in the single market completely thwarts those aims.
Lord Blencathra. Now to Friday in the Commons, where a Liberal Democrat took the chance to celebrate his party's success in the Richmond Park by-election. Lib Dem Sarah Olney won the poll, overturning a Conservative majority of more than 20,000. The election was caused when the sitting Conservative MP, Zach Goldsmith, resigned to campaign against the government's decision to back a third Heathrow runway. He stood as an independent, but the Lib Dems campaigned and won on their opposition to Brexit. Tom Brake raised the victory during a question on the UK's international aid commitments.
Can I be the first Member of Parliament to congratulate Sarah Olney on her fantastic election yesterday, overturning a majority of 23,000. And I'm sure the residents of Richmond Park are very interested in what we're discussing today. And can I ask the Minister to confirm that the government's desire to boost trade post the EU referendum won't be at the expense of the poorest countries around the world, and they remain the priority? And can he also use this opportunity to confirm that if the most effective way of distributing aid in the future is through the European Union, that the government won't hesitate to do that?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will, if I may, pass over the first part of the honourable member's comment and focus on the latter two questions that he raised. Trade is absolutely vital to lift people out of poverty. If we can improve economies and improve the functioning of economies in some of the world's poorest nations, that is often the best way to ensure long-term and sustainable development. And we will always look, and I have said already a number of times today and previously, at our international partners to ensure that where we spend UK taxpayers' money, it is spent efficiently, and that will mean considering partners who can deliver the outcomes that we want to secure, regardless of whether they happen to be founded in, based in, run through the European Union or not.
James Wharton. Now they've been dubbed the Oscars of Westminster. Big names from the worlds of politics and academia were in London on Tuesday night for the Political Studies Association Awards, and Julia Butler was there for us.
Stardust, politics and speeches. Yes, it's the annual Political Studies Association Awards. Hillsborough campaigners Margaret Aspinall and Professor Phil Stratton collected the Campaigners of the Year award to a standing ovation. And Grayson Perry won the Contribution to the Arts and Culture Prize. The Enlightening the Public Award went to the Iraq War Inquiry Team, whose 12-volume report was published 5 years after its final hearings took place.
It's a great pleasure to present the Enlightening the Public Award to the Iraq Inquiry, chaired by Sir John Chilcot. Now, I should say that Sir John was meant to get this award way back in 2010. Gus comes on the line. John, he said, there's got to be an inquiry into the Iraq business. Will you chair it? I said, I have no idea. Who? What terms of reference? When? All that stuff. He said, no, you don't understand. You've got 8 minutes to decide.
Sir John told us of the pressure he faced to complete the work.
A certain amount and mounting, principally I think from bereaved families who really wanted some kind of closure, but also increasingly from media and from political leadership. And yet, if you want to do something on that scale, in that depth, you have a choice. You can either compromise on the depth and scale and quality of what you do, or you can take the time you need. We took the time we needed.
And Baroness Smith of Basildon received the Parliamentarian of the Year honour for her work leading the Labour peers.
Wow. Everyone's saying tonight what a topsy-turvy, strange political year it's been, and perhaps evidence that a member of the House of Lords can be Parliamentarian of the Year is perhaps proof of that.
I think as well as talking, which often people think as parliamentarians, you have to listen. And one of the great things I think about my colleagues, my Labour colleagues in the House of Lords, is how they pull together as a team. And it's that working as a team that lets us make a difference.
That report put together by Julia Butler. Now let's take a look at some of the other news from around Westminster in brief. Ministers are writing to all national sporting bodies asking them to redouble their efforts to protect children following accusations of child abuse in football. Labour called the Minister to the Commons to ask what more could be done to protect youngsters.
We need representatives from the FA, government, schools and relevant organisations to be working with the police to ensure any historic claims are fully investigated, but also, Mr Speaker, to ensure it is stamped out and our young players have a safe and confidential way of reporting.
The FA's internal review must be a properly resourced investigation that looks at the culture within football that meant abuse took place for so long and went unreported and uninvestigated for so long. Would she further agree with me that if this report is to have credibility, it must be published in full in public?
No good will come from anybody trying to cover anything up. We need to know exactly what happened, how it happened, what went wrong, and make sure that those mistakes are not taken again.
The government was defeated in the House of Lords on Wednesday when peers insisted the go-ahead should be given to the second stage of the Leveson inquiry into ties between the press and the police. Ministers have begun a consultation on whether or not to continue with Leveson Part 2. But an independent peer tried to force the issue into the Policing and Crime Bill, describing it as a matter of honour.
The government could have begun proceedings for Leveson 2 weeks ago, when the relevant trials had finished. Doing so would help draw a line under Hillsborough, Orgreave, Daniel Morgan, countless other scandals involving both the police and the press. My Lords, I do not think this is a trivial matter. A commitment was made to Leveson 2. The victims want it, the public want it, and for democracy to function well, we all need it.
The government's been faced with emotional appeals to airdrop supplies to civilians suffering in Aleppo in the latest onslaught in the Syrian civil war. Aleppo has become a key battleground in the war between forces loyal to President Bashar al-Assad and Western-backed rebels who want to overthrow him. The calls for action were led by a Labour MP.
Mr Speaker, what Britain stands for on the world stage is being challenged. This is a test. There is no risk-free course of action left, but I believe there's a right course of action. Let us not stand and watch as one of the great cities of the world is destroyed. Let us not allow 100,000 children to starve in eastern Aleppo.
Britain has the ability and indeed aspiration to play a significant role on the world stage. We, in 2013 in August, had that opportunity, Mr. Speaker, and we blinked. We had an opportunity there to hold Assad to account. And because of that, we've ended up with a situation whereby both Russia and Daesh have now come in. And the question I pose to this House, and to the Honourable Lady who screams from the seats, is that unless this Parliament gives the executive the support that we need, then our hands are tied on what we can do.
The Prisons Minister has told MPs the government has reached a deal with the Prison Officers Association over health and safety, pay and pensions. Last month, up to 10,000 prison officers in England and Wales stopped work over claims of a surge in violence in jails until a High Court injunction ordered them to end a 24-hour protest.
As the House is aware, we've been in discussions with the Prison Officers Association over health and safety, pay and pensions, and we've come to an agreement with the Prison Officers Association and the NEC on a deal that they would recommend to their members that frontline staff will now get a new pay and pensions package. We've also agreed a significant number of health and safety reforms, as well as new powers for governors in terms of how they deploy their staff in their prisons.
A Plaid Cymru MP is calling for CCTV to be mandatory in abattoirs that slaughter horses. Animal welfare charities say while consumer pressure on supermarkets helps ensure humane conditions for some animals, as horse meat is not sold in the UK, there is far less demand on equine slaughterhouses to install CCTV.
At the moment, DEFRA has said they wish to encourage a voluntary approach to installing CCTV. Welsh Government have also indicated that they support the use of CCTVs in slaughterhouses in Wales, but have failed to legislate to make that mandatory. It's clear this approach is not working. The FSA, in their board report of 21st September, confirmed that take-up of CCTV had plateaued at 49% in red meat slaughterhouses. Where slaughterhouses have CCTV, it may not be placed in the areas which allow them to monitor horse welfare. We do need a mandatory approach, I would beg.
Liz Saville-Roberts. Now, income tax powers worth £12 billion were formally transferred from Westminster to Holyrood in the week. The changes take effect from April. Here's BBC Scotland's Westminster correspondent David Porter.
Make no mistake, this is a biggie. It's long been anticipated, but now it's been delivered. Since the Scottish Parliament was re-established in 1999, people in Edinburgh have been talking about taxation and how it can be used. Now, when the Parliament was re-established, MSPs had the power to vary the standard rate of income tax by up or down 3 pence in the pound. They decided not to use that, but this is a completely new kettle of fish. When the new powers come into operation in April next year, Westminster will still set the thresholds, but the rates and the bands of income tax will be decided by MSPs in Holyrood. That means that the Scottish Parliament will be responsible for collecting far more money. It means it will be responsible for collecting far more of the money that it spends. Now, the UK government says that with power goes responsibility, so the Scottish government will have to make perhaps some very tough decisions. The Scottish government, for its part, says it means that it'll be able to concentrate, as far as income tax is concerned, on the priorities that it wants to bring in for Scotland. So this is a big moment. People say, to some extent, it is the Parliament growing up.
David Porter. Now, let's go back to Brexit and the future of the UK economy. MPs on the Treasury Committee spoke to two experts on the subject. First up, Paul Johnson, the head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies think tank. He told them it was too early to be sure how the referendum vote would impact on the UK long term. But unlike in most periods, economic forecasters were at least able to be certain that there was some uncertainty ahead.
Presumably, when you use the word some, you really mean a great deal.
Well,
because of much more than usual.
Well, there's known unknowns, as it were. I mean, as it turned out, we were subject to vast uncertainty in 2007 that we just didn't know about. And actually, even in 2010, when most forecasts were thinking the economy was going to grow much more strongly than it turned out to do. So actually, if you look back, you'll see that there were periods when outturns were vastly different to expectations. I think what's slightly different now is that we know that there are certain decision points, for example, whether we stay in the single market or not, and indeed uncertainties about how the economy will respond over the next couple of years, which we know are uncertain. Now, it will be, I don't think it's within most people's band of uncertainty that we'll have anything close to what happened in 2008. It's just that we know that there are some changes coming along, and we don't really know exactly how the economy will respond to them.
The next day, the head of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility was asked what he thought was coming down the track.
My suspicion is that, in particular, if we're in a negotiation in which nothing very much is agreed until everything is agreed, we could be, I could be retired, you'd be in the Lords, much will have passed before we know where we are.
I think you will deserve your period first. You would agree, wouldn't you, that the crucial moment of most uncertainty is likely to be the consequences of any new arrangements put in place after we arrive in the arrival hall?
Which is your date for the arrival hall?
2019.
2019, yeah. Well, as I say, I think it comes back in part to the degree to which this ends up being a negotiation in which, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.
Imagine yourself in an aeroplane.
You probably know, you can judge better than I whether things are going to be that much clearer in 2019. I fear possibly not.
Imagine yourself in an aeroplane, you're about to take off, and there's a discussion taking place about where to go. Would your feeling of uncertainty be increased, decreased, or unchanged if, while you were having the conversation, you took off?
I would, the fact that I got on an aircraft and people are still discussing where they wanted to go would be a source of sufficient alarm before we started, I think.
You're very good at not answering the question.
Robert Choate. Time now for our look at what's been happening in the wider world of politics this week. Here's Gary Connor.
Is it time for Parliament to set sail? Former head of the Royal Navy Lord West told peers that putting Parliament on a boat and towing it around the country might help combat the north-south divide. But could it be bad news for London? In the same debate, Lord Greaves suggested moving the capital to the English Midlands or the North. Fashion Watch now. Paisley ties were aflutter in the Commons as MP Gavin Newlands promoted its City of Culture bid. But Ian Paisley MP opted for a bow tie. He's back, but not on the front line. Former PM Tony Blair has announced a new organisation, a platform for engagement for the political centre ground. And we end on a musical boost for Theresa May. She's won the backing of 70s songstress Kate Bush.
Gary Connor. Finally, he was, until the early hours of Friday morning at least, Westminster's newest MP. And on Wednesday, David Cameron's successor in the Oxfordshire seat of Witney made his maiden speech.
He found the Conservative Party bleeding after 3 successive election defeats. He picked it up, restored its faith in itself, and returned it to government. Mr. Speaker, I know firsthand the effect that his leadership had upon the party and on the country and on its fortunes, because I was there on the streets and I felt the turning of the tide. There is perhaps no greater tribute that I could pay David Cameron than to say that he made the Conservative Party believe in itself again. He made it fresh, dynamic and able to communicate with modern Britain.
And he made a surprising revelation.
In 1945, Albert Stubbs won the seat of Cambridgeshire for the Labour Party. He was a favourite.